It's fitting that I'm releasing this story on Halloween because it's one of the most chilling I've attempted to report on by far. This is the first of a series of twisted tales of prosecutorial misconduct allegations against Ohio Assistant State Attorney General Dan Kasaris. The allegations span back at least a dozen years to his time as a Cuyahoga County prosecutor. On January 20th, 2021, a story was posted to the People's Archive of Police Violence in Cleveland, an organization I work with as a technical consultant and web developer. It was written by a woman named Kelly Patrick and simply titled Prosecutorial Misconduct. The entry was summarized as follows. A victim of spousal assault describes a prosecutor abandoning her case because the perpetrator was a brother of the prosecutor. Now, an administrator of the archive put me in touch with Kelly after following up with her and learning that the prosecutor in question was Dan Kasaris. This was significant to the archive administrators and myself because less than a month prior, I had conducted an interview for them with Emmanuel Franklin, the father of Desmond Franklin, who was shot and killed by off-duty Cleveland police officer Jose Garcia. Dan Kasaris was the special prosecutor assigned to present the investigation into Garcia's actions to the grand jury, who ultimately decided not to indict Garcia. This compounded the already disturbing nature of Kelly's allegations because it begged the question, if Dan Kasaris was willing to cover up a crime to protect a family member, would he be equally likely to cover up crimes for, say, the police? I invited Kelly into my home and asked her to discuss her story in detail with me.
My name is Kelly Patrick. I was married to John Patrick, an attorney at Reminger, who is the brother of the Assistant Attorney General now, Dan Kasaris. On the side of the road, there was a graffiti on a building, and it said, "Stop mass incarceration, puncturethesilence.com." And I was just like, whoa. So I looked it up and I saw all these stories and I thought, oh my gosh, I could write my story. So I hadn't really even publicly told anybody what happened to me. That happened in 2009. This is now 2020. I kept quiet for 11 years. So I decided to just kind of vaguely write a story about what happened to me, still at that time afraid to use names because I hadn't never talked about it before. So then when you wrote me back, I was like, oh my God, like I actually have to talk now. I have to tell people the story. So that was really the first time that I just told somebody what happened. In 2009, my ex-husband, he was my husband at the time, assaulted me. And I had just had a baby 10 months before that. So I was still postpartum head, brain. And he just in a moment of rage came at me.
Police and medical records confirm that Kelly received stitches on her right foot and wrist. In Kelly's statement, she says that she and John argued about his level of drinking. When she attempted to throw out some of his booze, a few of the bottles broke on the floor. At this point, he became violent and threw her into the pile of glass.
And so I got hurt, and so he knew I was hurt, and he had carried me up to the bathtub and then went back down to the basement, and that's when he ended up I didn't know this at the time, but he had called Dan and said that he probably told him, that he had hurt me or something like that. And at that point, I think he knew that I had to call 911 because I was hurt. So he went down to the basement to do cleanup control, and by the time the cops came, they already knew. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but they had already known that John was a lawyer and that he was the brother of Dan. The police come, and my ex-husband tries to tell the police that I was crazy and high on marijuana, and I attacked him. And I was looking at him going, why are you telling, in my eyes, I'm thinking why are you doing this? Why are you telling him this? And so they look at me and they're like, are you high? And I said, no, I'm not. And they were like, well, where do you get the marijuana? And I was like, he grows it down in the basement. And so I don't think they knew that the grow operation was there. I think they just knew that he had assaulted me. So then that caused a big uproar. The DEA came. We had German Shepherds in the house. They were taking all the equipment from the basement out of the house. And then they had the drug dogs going into each room. So I just sat there while all of this was happening, and he was in the kitchen. They kept me in the living room. And so after the DA was still there, then the ambulance took me to the hospital. So I'm at the hospital, I have an officer with me, and he tells me that my husband was in jail. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, I can't even believe this is all happening. Like, this is absolutely crazy. So the cop tells me that he's gonna take me home, everything will be okay. So I trust him. I'm like, okay. So he takes me home, and we pull in the driveway, and I walk into the house, and I see my ex-husband sitting at the kitchen table with his hands behind his head, his feet up on the table, laughing with all the people left in the house. And I was like, okay, like what happened? Like, was he not in jail? Did he get out? Like, I had no idea what had gone on by this time. So somebody pulls me aside into my family room and says, there was a change of plans. You can't press charges. Just go get your kids and feed them. So I did. So I went and got my kids, went in the kitchen. I was feeding them in the corner of the kitchen while everybody's still in the kitchen chit-chatting and laughing and talking. And then all of a sudden everybody leaves, and I'm left with my ex-husband who had just assaulted me that day. So he went down in the basement, got his pot, got his beer, came up, acted like nothing ever happened.
Kelly has managed to obtain various records of the incident that night, which confirm her story, including photos of the drugs and paraphernalia that were cataloged by the DEA.
So a couple months later, I had started talking to divorce lawyers, and apparently at the time, I don't remember this, but one of the lawyers wanted to press charges or at least look into that situation. Well, John, my ex-husband, had sent me an email and said that if I kept quiet, the North Olmsted would sweep it under the rug. So I kept quiet because they made it seem like I was going to be charged with assault in the grow operation. So I better keep quiet because if I didn't, then I would be the one that would be charged. I believed it. What would I know? I don't know any of the law stuff like that. So I kept quiet. So I left. I left him like a couple of months later, and I never told anybody that story. I never talked about it at all until 2019 when my ex took me to court for a post-degree litigation. He started talking about it. So I'm like thinking, okay, why? Like, why is he telling everybody about this? So he would tell the story like about the fight, but then he didn't tell the rest of it. So he would like spin the story to tell everybody like, oh yeah, she was crazy, she assaulted me, but never told the rest of the story. So then when everybody started questioning me, they were like, what happened that night? I told the whole story. So then the more I talked about it, the more that I just started thinking about it, I was just like, wait a minute, like what did happen that day? Because I had spent 11 years not even thinking, 10 years really, not even thinking about it. So I never even processed any of the trauma that happened that day until 2019. So he kept talking about it. Everybody, that's all people asked me about was Dan and John. So I talked about them all the time. And then that's why I was watching a documentary one night and it reminded me of Dan, and I Googled Dan, and that's when I found Tony's blog.
The blog Kelly is referring to is freetonyviola.com, a site which I discovered shortly after my first phone conversation with her while searching online for Dan Kasaris. I have interviewed Viola about his allegations of prosecutorial misconduct against Kasaris, and his case will be the subject of the next episode in this series. The facts in Viola's case are as shocking as they are complicated, so I wanted to start with Kelly's story, which is much simpler but no less damning. Kelly has launched her own website, InsideTheMind.net, where she chronicles more personal insights into Kasaris based on her experiences within his family circle.
I knew Dan as the party guy. He was always drinking. Every time I saw them, they were always drinking. That's just what they do, is they drink together. So I saw him, he's obnoxious, he's loud, he's very misogynistic for sure. So they kind of treated me like I was one of the guys. I don't drink, so I was always the sober one. And they would sit there and just chat like I was a dude and talk about women. They would talk about women's bodies, they would talk about, butts and boobs and you name it, sex and all of that stuff. I was so naive, like I still had no idea that they were all cheating on our, the wives. But they would just openly talk like that. So that's how I know Dan. That's Dan to me. He's just obnoxious, he's loud, he's drunk. He's the loudest one of the party. He's always the loudest one. Everybody, the attention always had to be on him. That's how I know Dan. So I'm now getting to know Dan in his professional life just based on everybody that I've met so far. But I didn't know him like that before. He was always disheveled. Like, he never had, my ex-husband hated this about him, he was never put together. Like, he never had, for a prosecutor, especially for a county prosecutor, you would think he would like want to be put together, right? But he would always have like a mismatched jacket with his pants, or like clothes that didn't work well together. Whereas my ex-husband was always going to a tailor, so he would have the full suit where he just looks very distinguished. And he didn't like that about Dan, because Dan just didn't care. Dan just wore whatever. And then I since found out that Dan would show up like in clothes, like the next day he'd have the same outfit that he wore the day before in court. So that's Dan to me.
Kelly has been working with Viola to expose Kasaris in various Ohio courts. I asked her how she first came to be in touch with Tony and why she is working with him.
So my intention was, at the time, I didn't really know what an obstruction of justice meant. I just knew that something Dan did was wrong, because now I had a couple of emails from John threatening me if I talked about it. And he kept saying that Dan would lose his job. Everybody would be affected if I talked. So I knew it was something big if Dan would lose his job for it, but I didn't know at the time what an obstruction of justice was. I just knew that I had a story that Dan would get in trouble with, and that's what I presented to Tony. And I wanted to be just as vague as I was when I did that one story to Tony, because honestly, I didn't even know like if Tony was actually Tony. Like, I didn't know if it was some fake website that Dan did or whatever. I don't know. So I wanted to be very vague, and I just said, I have a story about Dan that might help you. And so he never wrote back. So that would have been November, 7 months later. I had already started getting more courage about talking about it. And so by the time I found out that he had been released, the message I sent him on Twitter was that I was married to Dan's brother. And so I gave him more information, like, listen, I know, valid stuff, but I do also have a story. So when I told him the story, that's when he started enlightening me on what an obstruction of justice was and what they really did that day. So I had no idea. I was so naive. I trusted that people did their job, that they were just honest people. I had no idea that these guys were criminals. Had no idea. I trusted my husband. I trusted his brother. They were lawyers. I just thought they were good people.
It's my and Kelly's hope that more people who have knowledge of Kasaris' wrongdoing as a prosecutor will come forward and share their stories. Just this week, a few counties over, Justin Dennis of Mahoning Matters released an exhaustively detailed report covering numerous instances of misconduct by Assistant County Prosecutor Dawn Cantalamessa. And despite this, Cantalamessa was never fired. She simply transferred over to Ashtabula County. Now, the recent and distant history of prosecutorial misconduct in this region makes it difficult to believe that Dan Kasaris is a bad apple, but rather part of a diseased tree that casts a shadow across the entire state. What's important to keep in mind is that in the time since Kelly's story occurred, Dan Kasaris has gone on to have a very successful career. Not only is he the Assistant State Attorney General, he's also served on the North Royalton City Council for about 12 years, took a year off, and now he's back running once again to represent Ward 6 in North Royalton. Now, if you know anyone who lives in this area, be sure to share this video with them before November 2nd.
People would ask me, everybody asked me, this is how I started my blog. Everybody would ask me, aren't you afraid? I'm not afraid. I felt more safe speaking everything than I did before when I was quiet. It's the weirdest feeling. So I just kept going with that. I've just figured, you know what? Everything they did to me, I got to write about it. And that was my way of just coming out into the light even more. So whatever they do to me, yes, it's scary, but I also can write about it too. And I can expose them for what they're doing.
That's what I've got for part 1. I'm doing what I can to expose this story as fast as I can, but I'm just one person, and the 80-ish bucks a month I pull in on Patreon and my Substack subscribers really means I can only devote so much time to working on stories like these, and it certainly doesn't empower me to pay anyone to help out with editing or research or all the work that has to go on around a story once it's done, getting it out there and sharing it. So if you are unable to support me monetarily but would like to lend some of your time and talents to the work, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. If you can type, if you can read, hell, if you can click, I can probably find some way to have you help me get the work done and do the important things like write an outro for when I'm done saying everything on my script, because I ran out of words a couple minutes ago, and this is what happens when I improvise. It's not great. Well, thank you for listening, and be safe.